Hi guys, Allie here in the George house. I'm here in the library, and I'm going to give you guys kind of just a little kind of general history about the lady of the house, the one that we kind of follow the chapter for here, and that's Mamie George. So she would be born in the Davis Mansion at the current location of the Oakland Hospital in Richmond prior to the house being moved in 1977. She was born there in 1877 as the second child of Judge Davis, otherwise John Harris Pickens Davis, and his wife Susan Elizabeth Ryan. Now, they did have a daughter prior to Mamie being born. Her name was Daisy Bell, but she did die shortly after childbirth. So it would be Mamie that would be born next, and then Mamie had a younger brother named Thomas Wyatt, otherwise also known as Bud. So they would grow up in the house there in Richmond. Mamie would be sent off to a all-girls school in Galveston called Ursuline Academy. There's a painting of Mamie just behind my head here. That's her when she was about 13 years old when she attended school. And then she would later attend Baylor College to get her bachelor's degree. So she would marry her childhood sweetheart, Albert George, in October of 1896, actually in the parlor of the Davis Mansion. Her grandmother, Polly, who also lived in the house, had died a few months prior in July of 1896. So the next year, they decided that they would want to build a home together on the original site of the property, because it was when Mamie's grandmother died, Polly would kind of separate out her land grant to Bud and then also to Mamie. So Mamie and Albert would come out to the original property and they would build part one of their house, and that was built in 1899. It was a kind of single-story classic Victorian style. It was designed by Nicholas Clayton. He was a very famous architect from Galveston. He's done a lot of famous houses down there, including the Bishop's Palace, and they would reside in that house for many years on the original property. Now, Albert and Mamie would have one child together. His name was Davis, after Mamie's maiden name. He was born a year after they were married in 1897. However, Davis would die at the age of 2 of infant cholera. And so that was right before they had moved into the property. So living here for the first few years, it was just strictly Albert and Mamie by themselves. And they wouldn't have any more children after Davis's death. So they would continue living in the house, and then in 1911, they would do the renovation, kind of the arts and crafts style. And that is what the current house looks like today. That's what you can kind of come see out here when you are a visitor to the park. So they would live in the house up until 1968. So there's going to be a lot of different changes whenever you guys come to visit the house in regards to technology and sleeping arrangements and furniture, and then even like kitchen appliances as well. So there's a really kind of a cool kind of arc of different time periods kind of in here in the house. So Albert and Mamie were very kind of active in the local community. Mamie's father, Judge Davis, owned all the banks in the city. He was also in charge of his mother-in-law, Polly Ryan's kind of pasture and cattle company as well. So being with the local businesses and the banks, that was kind of his main kind of prerogative. And so that's where Albert, Mamie's husband, would kind of get his business start, was working with the banks. Now you can see next to me, I'm here actually in their master bathroom, and there is a safe that is in the closet next to the toilet. Now, we all know that in the 1920s, the Great Depression would start, and so, banks began to close. There were a lot of issues going on with the Davis's banks. So Mamie's father would encourage them to have a vault actually put into the house to hold things like their petty cash, important paperwork, jewelry, and everything else. But it's a pretty ingenious location for it, because if you're going to rob a house, you are never going to think about checking the bathroom for a safe. Now, there's actually a second vault that's actually down below us in the cellar. And so to get to that conveniently, you have to go into another bathroom. And if you open up the closet door, there's a secret staircase that'll take you downstairs to the family vault. So really kind of an interesting way of kind of hiding your wealth, but that's not how Albert and Mamie really were. They were very kind and generous to the local community. Shortly after the Great Depression would occur, Albert and Mamie would actually donate $2 million of their personal financing back to Fort Bend County, and that's $29 million in today's currency. So that way, every family in Fort Bend and kind of the Richmond area would have access to their funds. They could buy food, they could pay their bills. So this community was heavily, stable during the Great Depression. And Albert and Mamie were fortunate enough, they had natural gas and oil discovered on the property in 1923 and in 1931. So their income was completely safe and fine during that Great Depression. So that's what they were able to kind of do with those kind of charity events to kind of help out that community. So this is a painting of Mamie when she was married at the age of 19. This painting was actually based off of a photograph of her that was taken at her wedding. And you guys can actually see that photograph when you visit the Davis house and you visit her bedroom upstairs. So she was married at the age of 19. She would live in the house for many years with her husband, Albert. Now, in the time of her child dying of infant cholera, they didn't have any more children after his death. In the 1920s, Mamie's cousin, Henry Jones, who's a descendant from her great-grandfather, the original Henry Jones, he and his wife, Rydonia, and their daughter, Mary, would move into the property in the early 20s to help Albert and Mamie run the ranch. Now, since Albert and Mamie didn't have any living children, they fell in love with Mary, and they would decide to make her the next heiress of the ranch. So she would live here on the property till she was about 23 years old. In that time, Mary would meet her husband, James Prowell. They would get married. She would become pregnant, so she was expected to have a newborn son in July of 1943. But prior to her giving birth, her husband would go over to go serve as a Marine during World War II in the Pacific, so he would fight over along there. So unfortunately, as tragedy kind of ensues with this family, if you've been out here before, Mary was 8 months pregnant and she was on her way back home from Houston with her mother, Mr. George, and their driver when they were in a head-on collision with a semi-truck just a few miles up the road. And so just due to complications of the accident, there was just nothing that the doctors could do to save Mary or her unborn child. So they would both pass away later in the evening, again, leaving the family without any heirs. So if you visited the park out here or are, a citizen here in Richmond and Fort Bend County, you can kind of see the impact just by some small things that Albert and Mamie had left behind. So being officially childless and without any heirs, in 1945, Albert and Mamie set up the George Foundation. So that foundation is going to donate money and property back to Fort Bend County. So they would build a few local schools in the area. So you have the George Ranch High School, the Polly Ryan Middle School. You would have the Polly Ryan Hospital, which would later become Oak Bend. You have a library, you have a YMCA. They were also on the board of the Houston Rodeo. So they did a lot of extra things for the community, also kind of what I talked about prior with the Great Depression and them donating money. So they were very involved kind of with the community after that. Both of them, Mamie and Albert, would kind of live the rest of the days out here in the ranch. Albert would pass away in 1955 at the age of 81, and Mamie would continue to live here in the house until 1968. By that point in time, the house was just too big for her for one woman by herself, so she would go move to a smaller town, a smaller home here in the city, and Mamie would pass away in 1971 at the age of 94. So something that I always just kind of find mind-blowing is what Mamie would have experienced from being born in 1877 to 1971. So a woman born in a home that has no electricity, no toilets, none of like the modern amenities that we have, would live long enough to see both world wars, the Great Depression, the invention of cars, television, electricity, even the moon landing in 1969. So if you just think of everything that happened in between, it's really kind of amazing what Mamie would have witnessed in her life. And I wish she had a book that kind of talked about everything she's seen, but she's a pretty remarkable woman and has left behind a wonderful legacy that you can definitely witness out here, but also in Richmond. All right, you guys, we'll see you later. Have a nice day.